Hello, my name is Jarosław and I'd like to welcome you to this episode of IT Leadership Insights by Future Processing. Kicking off a project is definitely not a stress-free activity. It might get even worse if you do it with an external partner. We are going to discuss today and to show you some examples of how to do it properly. We'll share some case studies and the best advice for you, together with my brilliant guest, who is Steve Baker, a freelance IT consultant and an owner of Vermilion IT company. Hello, Steve.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Steve, for those who haven't seen the previous episode when we talked about whether to buy a software or to build it on its own, could you please make a short introduction of yourself?
Cool. So, as you said, an independent IT consultant, got a fairly substantial background in software development. But these days I earn my living by working with companies, looking at business processes, figuring out what kind of software they need to solve their problems, and then if there's any development arising from that, I will run that for them if they want me to.
Sure. Steve, every action that we do or every project, regardless of whether it's in a professional life or in a personal, followed the same path. The way we started, the kind of results that we can achieve. So the better we start, the better results we have. And I think this is also applies to software development. So I would like to ask you, what elements should be taken into consideration and taken care of when you are starting a project, when you are doing a kickoff?
Well, before I came to talk to you, I actually canvassed a number of my colleagues about this. And between us, we came up with kind of like a top three.
All right.
So the first one is to have a kickoff. Putting together a system, it's a social activity as much as a technical activity.
Okay.
So an important part of having a kickoff meeting is to introduce everybody to everybody, to bring the stakeholders and some end users in to meet the development team and vice versa. And what we're really trying to do is to develop some commitment from both parties to the project. Mm-hmm. So having a kickoff meeting, probably the number one tip.
But would you say that the kickoff of a project is the kickoff meeting only, or it's just something more, or it's something in advance?
Well, kickoff is a bit of a process, so you're probably not going to get all the kickoff activities done in just one meeting. And in fact, one of the things that you need to be careful of, so we brought all these senior stakeholders in, and you don't really want to spend all the time in the kickoff meeting discussing, because developers love to spend hours discussing on what to name their Git branches, for example. So there is an exercise which is to capture all the infrastructure, development environment setup and all that kind of thing, but that's a separate meeting to what I would describe as the project kickoff, which is the one where you have your stakeholders come in. Mm. So anyway, first of all, have one. Secondly, make it the opportunity where you get an agreement on what you're trying to achieve out of the project. So let me give you an example. You and your partner decide that you're going to go out and you're going to have a great night out on Saturday. Now, to you, that means having a nice quiet meal in a restaurant. To them, that means going out to a nightclub till 4 o'clock in the morning. You both agree going out on a Saturday night is a good idea, but you have wildly different ideas about what that looks like. And so it's true in projects. So what you don't want to do is to, after your kickoff, people walk away from that meeting with slightly different ideas about what you're trying to achieve. The purpose of the meeting is to set that objective and to set that vision of what success looks like. And frankly, if you haven't agreed that with the stakeholders first, you're probably not in a position to actually start the development yet. What my colleagues all agreed on this is one of the number one areas for failure is where there isn't a common actual agreement on what a successful project looks like.
How do you make sure that you get the proper engagement of all the stakeholders? Because it sounds brilliant. We get everyone is sharing the same goal, the same objective, everyone knows what is the vision. But in reality, and I'm not sure what are your experiences, but I know that it doesn't always happen that way. So there is a tendency of stakeholders, okay, my job here is done, this is what needs to be done, goodbye, do it.
Yeah, and again, people point out that lack of stakeholder engagement is one of the common factors for project failure. It is a difficult one. Again, this is a social enterprise, but trying to get stakeholders to recognise that not only do they have a financial investment in this, but they are a source of expertise. The development team will have thousands of questions, many of which can only be answered by the stakeholders, and they need to be answered in a fairly timely fashion. So again, going back to one of the purposes of the kickoff is to, I don't want to say educate, but bring the stakeholders in. And they don't just have rights, but they also have responsibilities here to the project as well, and trying to bring that out and get them involved so that they are bought into the project, not just for the initial kickoff, but through the whole process.
Would you say that there is any kind of difference in the way that you kick off a project with an external company comparing to the internal project within your company?
Yeah, there's a lot of things are the same, but probably the key differences are an external company won't know about your business or is unlikely to know about your business. So when you're working with an internal development team, they've probably been working in that business, they know what it does. So I do put a bit of time aside to describe what the business does, what the critical success factors are, maybe bring some flow charts, diagrams, that sort of thing to it, just to explain what the business does. Second thing is you're going to be working at distance. So you as the product owner or project manager or whatever whatever your role is, and your stakeholders are probably not going to be in the same room as the development team. So there are some things there to work through about how you're going to work together at distance. The project I did here with Fareshare, we started off with taking Scrum as our process model, and that's quite good because that's an off-the-shelf way of framework for running a project. It's got defined roles, it's got defined responsibility, it's got defined process. So it meant that even though we were separated at distance, we both knew what that process looked like. Now you can and should adapt your process as you go on, but taking an off-the-shelf process framework that your outsourced supplier and you can agree on is a pretty good starting point. I think probably the last thing is just to say that you're a customer-supplier relationship,
Okay.
but when you go into that kick-off meeting as the customer, I think you're on show. I think it's your opportunity to demonstrate to the supplier that you're going to be a good customer. You're going to turn up on time, you're going to do the things you say you're going to do, you're going to be good people to work with, because that develops confidence in the supplier that you know what you're doing. And confidence at the early stage of the project goes quite a long way.
Why don't we take a look at some real cases? And you mentioned Fareshare, and this is the project that was done for a British charity preventing food waste. Could you please tell a little bit about that project and how the kickoff of that project was done, because it was quite a success?
Well, probably should just talk a little bit about what Fareshare does.
Yeah,
so they distribute surplus food from the supply chain, which means they're taking food in from the supermarket distribution channel and from manufacturers, and they're taking it in large volume, and then they distribute it out to several thousand partner charities around the UK. So some of the things we did in the kickoff for that, Fareshare has quite an unusual business model. Not many businesses give things away. So we talked about that, and we did a bit of a tabletop game model of a day in the life of Fareshare. So we did a little exercise on the board with some moving post-it notes around and things like that, a little bit of a game to try and illustrate what that business model was. The other thing that happened there was Future Processing also sent a couple of the team members out to work with Fareshare for the day, which was good. They got experience of what Fareshare was doing on the ground, and that was a piece of good practice I've taken away from that. I think that's very good. The last thing we did on that kickoff, I think, is possibly a bit unusual, but we'd already dealt with systems that are doing things like Fareshare did. So we did bring to that kickoff meeting a kind of software design, a bit of a software architecture that we wanted to use because we knew it worked. And we talked that through with the team, and it meant at the end of the kickoff, not only have we done the things we talked about the business model, talked about what success looks like, but we also had the first beginnings of how the software was going to be organized as well. So that was quite nice.
All right. I really like this part of the discussion when you talk about how important it is to understand the vision and to engage people, because apart from obviously getting the knowledge about the company and the business, it really boosts the motivation of the team, and I can feel it when I'm working with the teams here in Future Processing. So the knowledge about how the company works really gives positive energy to the people.
Okay, well that's good. I mean, the other thing I would say to anybody who's working is also in terms, particularly process and things like this, is listen to the supplier. So that's a good example where your supplier is saying, if you do this, the team is more motivated. So they have probably a lot more experience in working outsourced projects than you do. So listen to them and pay heed to their advice.
Okay, Steve, so to summarize, what can be done to minimize the risk of a project failure if we concentrate on a project kickoff?
So probably number one, as I said, is have one. Number two, make sure you agree what the outcome is that you're trying to achieve from this project. And probably the third one is to agree what your initial process is going to look like, particularly if you're working with an outsourced developer. You don't want to be spending your first couple of iterations arguing about how you're doing it. Agree on initial starting position, because you can always adapt the way you're working as the project goes on.
All right, Steve, thank you for interesting discussion and for the tips that you provided.
You're very welcome.
And thank you for watching this episode of IT Leadership Insights by Future Processing. If you found that useful and you liked it, please share it and recommend it to your friends and colleagues who might need that knowledge, and let us know if there is anything you would like us to talk about in further episodes. Until next time.